My parents didn't come to my wedding. Not because they were sick, not because they couldn't afford the trip, but because I dared to get married before my perfect sister. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Kwame Johnson. I'm 28, born and raised in Atlanta, the son of African immigrants who gave everything to build a life here. I worked hard to make them proud, finished school, got a solid job in IT, paid my own way, never asked them for a dime. But no matter what I did, I was always second place in their eyes. My little sister Madison, 2 years younger, was the golden child. She was the one they bragged about to neighbors, the one who got all the attention. Madison was the future doctor, the one who could do no wrong. I used to tell myself it didn't matter, that parents just get extra excited about the youngest. But deep down, it hurt to always be compared, to always come up short. Still, I kept going, trying to earn my place in the family. Life started to feel brighter when I met Rachel. She's a nurse from Savannah, warm, steady, the kind of person who makes you feel safe the moment you sit next to her. We clicked instantly, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't fighting to prove myself. I was just loved. After a few years together, I proposed. She said yes with tears in her eyes, and I knew I was the luckiest man alive. We set a date, booked a small but beautiful venue, and sent invitations to everyone, including my parents and Madison. I thought maybe this would be the moment that brought us closer, that they'd finally see me not as Madison's older brother, but as a man starting his own life. A week before the wedding, my phone rang. It was my mom. Her voice was flat, cold, like she was delivering news she'd already decided on. She told me she and my dad wouldn't be coming. My stomach dropped. I asked her why, thinking maybe there had been an emergency. But she said, it wouldn't be right. Madison isn't married yet. It would be disrespectful for you to go first. I laughed at first, because what else can you do when your own mother says something like that? But she didn't laugh. She meant it. My dad backed her up, saying they needed to protect Madison's place in the family. I remember hanging up the phone and just sitting there, staring at nothing, feeling like a piece of me had been ripped out. The wedding day came. Rachel looked like an angel walking down the aisle, her hand trembling in mine as we said our vows. Our friends cheered. Her family cried tears of joy. But when I glanced at the seats reserved for my parents, all I saw was emptiness. 2 chairs, sitting there like a reminder of where their love should have been. That empty space hurt more than anything. I married the love of my life, but I also realized that day I'd lost something I could never get back. When I think back to my childhood, it feels like every memory carries the same theme. I was measured against Madison. From the time we were kids, it was clear who shined in my parents' eyes. If Madison drew a simple picture with crayons, they'd hang it on the fridge for weeks. If I brought home a drawing, it was tossed aside with a quick, "That's nice, Kwame." When she came home with a B, it was celebrated as if she'd won an award. When I came home with the same grade, I was told I should have worked harder. It wasn't just school. It was everything. The friends I made, the clothes I wore, the way I carried myself. Nothing was ever quite good enough. My mom would point out how polite Madison's friends were, how neatly they dressed, how their parents were proud of them. My dad would question the boys I hung around, saying they seemed like troublemakers, even if they weren't. If Madison wanted to try something new, like dance lessons or debate club, they found the money, encouraged her, and told her how talented she was. When I asked to join the basketball team, they said it was a waste of time and that I should focus on studying harder. At family gatherings, the difference was even louder. Relatives would ask what Madison was doing, and my parents would jump in, bragging about her grades, her charm, how she was destined for greatness. If someone asked about me, the answer was shorter. He's doing fine. That was it. Just fine. I'd be lying if I said it didn't sting, but I learned to swallow it. I told myself it was normal, that maybe parents just had a favorite and I shouldn't take it personally. I tried not to let it drag me down. Instead, I threw myself into carving out my own path. I studied computers, got good at fixing things, and pushed until I landed a steady job as an IT consultant. I built stability for myself piece by piece, without their encouragement, without anyone in my corner telling me they were proud. Still, a part of me always carried hope. I thought that one day, when I had something real to show them, they'd finally see me different. Maybe when I built my career, maybe when I settled down, maybe when I had a family of my own. I believed that if I just kept going, they'd eventually recognize me, not in comparison to Madison, but as their son who fought hard to stand on his own. But that hope came with a quiet weight. Every time they dismissed me, every time they held Madison up like she was perfect, I felt that weight press harder. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it didn't matter. Deep down, though, resentment was slowly stacking up inside me, waiting for the day it would be too heavy to ignore. The days after the ceremony were supposed to be filled with joy, but instead I felt a hollow ache that wouldn't go away. While Rachel and I tried to settle into married life, I couldn't stop thinking about the empty seats at the front row. I told myself maybe I'd hear from them soon, maybe they'd regret it. But no call came. No card, no message, nothing. It was as if the day never happened in their eyes. Then one afternoon, my phone lit up with Madison's name. For a split second, I thought she was reaching out to smooth things over, maybe to admit our parents had been wrong. I picked up, hoping for even the smallest sign of understanding. Instead, her voice was cheerful, almost smug. She told me she'd heard about the wedding, then added, "Mom and Dad didn't want to make too big a deal because they're saving their energy for mine." Her words sank in like a blade. There was no apology, no sympathy, just a reminder that even on my wedding day, I was a placeholder in my own family. I didn't argue with her, though every part of me wanted to. I just listened in silence, letting her talk about her plans and how excited everyone was for her future celebration. By the time she hung up, my hands were shaking. Rachel noticed right away that something was wrong. I tried to brush it off, but she pressed until I told her about the call. She didn't try to cover it with false comfort. Instead, she sat with me, holding my hand, letting me know she was there. Her presence steadied me, but it didn't erase the sting. What cut the deepest wasn't Madison's arrogance. It was the quiet absence from the two people who had raised me. They hadn't even sent a small note wishing us well. They couldn't be bothered to acknowledge the woman who had promised to stand by me for the rest of our lives. Their silence was louder than any insult. I thought about Rachel's family, how her parents had cried happy tears during the vows, how her cousins danced like the night would never end, how her uncles and aunts came up to me afterward and welcomed me like I'd always been one of them. And then I thought about my own parents, who couldn't even pick up the phone. I realized then that something had shifted permanently. The bond I'd been clinging to all my life, hoping it would grow stronger, was broken. Rachel reminded me I wasn't alone, that we could build something better together. I believed her, but the betrayal lingered, heavy and raw. For the first time, I saw my parents not just as flawed, but as people who had chosen to abandon me when it mattered most. And that choice stayed with me. Months slipped by after the wedding, and though the wound was still fresh, I convinced myself that going home might change something. I thought if they saw Rachel, if they saw how happy we were together, maybe it would soften whatever grudge they were holding. Rachel hesitated when I suggested the trip, but she agreed, wanting to give my family a fair chance. When we walked through the front door, the atmosphere was icy. My mom gave Rachel a brief smile that didn't reach her eyes, then quickly turned away. My dad barely looked up from his chair, muttering a dry hello. We sat down in the living room, but instead of warmth, the air was filled with little barbed remarks. My mom asked Rachel if she was managing to keep up in her job, her tone making it sound more like doubt than genuine interest. My dad commented on how fast everything had happened, almost as if he were warning us that mistakes were bound to follow. At first, I tried to brush it off, but the longer we sat there, the clearer their feelings became. They weren't just disappointed, they were resentful. Finally, my mom said it outright. "You rushed into this. Madison should have been the first to walk down the aisle. Her wedding will be the one our family truly celebrates." The words hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't just about Madison anymore. It was about them refusing to recognize my marriage, my choices, Rachel sat quietly beside me, her hand tight on mine under the table, as if grounding me so I wouldn't explode. I wanted to argue, to ask them how they could treat us this way, but looking at their faces, I realized there was no point. In that moment, the truth settled in. Nothing I did would ever measure up to Madison in their eyes. They had already decided that she was the shining star, the one whose happiness mattered more. My milestones would always be minimized, brushed aside, or outright ignored. Driving back afterward, Rachel finally spoke. "They're never going to give you what you're hoping for." Hearing it out loud stung, but I knew she was right. I had gone there searching for reconciliation, but all I found was confirmation. The hope I had been carrying for years, the belief that one day they'd see me as their son without comparison, died in that living room. What remained was a clarity I hadn't felt before. Their love had conditions, and those conditions revolved around Madison. I couldn't change that, no matter how hard I tried. For the first time in my life, I stopped wondering how to win their approval and started asking myself if I even wanted it anymore. Leaving their house that day felt like walking away from something I'd been chasing my whole life. For years I had bent myself out of shape, hoping for their approval, thinking if I worked harder or proved myself enough, they'd finally meet me halfway. But sitting through those pointed words, seeing the look in their eyes, I knew it was over. I wasn't going to beg for what should have been given freely. Back at our apartment, the silence between Rachel and me said everything. She could see how deep the cut went, but instead of letting me sink into bitterness, she gently pushed me forward. One night over dinner, she said, "We don't need them to validate us. We can build something better, our own family, our own way." Hearing her say that lit something inside me. For the first time, I realized I didn't have to keep standing at a locked door, waiting for it to open. I started pouring my energy into us, into making sure Rachel and I built a future that was solid and unshakable. I worked longer hours, not because I had to prove anything to my parents, but because I wanted us to have stability they could never take credit for. I began saving carefully, setting goals for a house, for trips, for the kind of life where Rachel and I could write our own story without depending on anyone else. But beneath that determination was another feeling, one darker, sharper. I wanted them to see. I wanted them to look at me one day and realize they had placed their bets on the wrong horse. Not through shouting or arguments, but through undeniable proof. Every achievement, every step forward would be a reminder of what they had dismissed. I didn't share all of this with Rachel, but she sensed it. Sometimes she'd catch me lost in thought, and she'd squeeze my hand, reminding me with a smile that our life together was more important than their opinion. Still, late at night, I would lie awake imagining ways to outshine the picture they had painted of Madison. I didn't want her downfall. I just wanted the truth to come out. I wanted them to face the fact that the son they had treated as an afterthought was the one who built something real. So I kept my plans quiet, even from the people closest to me. I focused on moving forward, step by step, knowing that time would bring the right moment. Patience became my weapon. I didn't need to chase after their acceptance anymore. All I needed was to keep building, to keep rising, until the day came when their own choices would come back to haunt them. That thought, as much as Rachel's steady encouragement, gave me the strength to let go of pleading and step fully into a future of my own making. Almost a year slipped past, and life with Rachel began to feel steady. We were working, saving, and carving out our own corner of the world. Then, out of nowhere, word reached me through a cousin. Madison was engaged. Her fiancé's name was Ethan Miller, a polished lawyer with money, connections, and the kind of smile that impressed parents. The news didn't come directly, of course. My phone stayed silent. No invitation, no update, not even a courtesy call. Instead, I heard secondhand about the lavish dinners, the champagne toasts, the way my parents couldn't stop boasting. According to my cousin, they acted like Madison had won some prize, bragging that she was marrying into success, telling anyone who would listen how perfect the match was. They were hosting parties, throwing celebrations, showering her with attention. It was everything they had denied me, but multiplied. Rachel sat beside me while my cousin filled me in, and though she didn't say much, I could feel her bristle. She knew what this meant for me, how the comparison would sharpen. For my parents, this was the event they had been waiting for, the moment to showcase their star. It didn't matter that I was already married, already building a future. To them, this was the wedding that counted. At first, anger bubbled up in me, not just because of their exclusion, but because it was so deliberate. They hadn't forgotten me. They had chosen to erase me from the picture. But layered under the anger was something else, something colder. Satisfaction. Because while they were busy parading Ethan around like he was some flawless catch, I already knew better. I remembered an evening long before Madison met him. Ethan had cornered Rachel at a professional event, speaking in a way no decent man should. She had brushed him off, but the arrogance in his tone, the persistence in his smile, left a mark. Rachel had told me about it that night, and though I hated hearing it, I kept quiet, not wanting to stir unnecessary conflict. But now, that memory returned with a weight I couldn't ignore. Sitting there after the call, I felt a strange calm settle over me. My parents were blind, celebrating a man they barely knew, placing all their pride in someone who, deep down, was rotten. They saw him as the ticket to status, the perfect addition to Madison's life. What they didn't see was the cracks. And I, of all people, knew where those cracks began. Rachel looked at me carefully, like she could sense the shift in my thoughts. I didn't explain it to her, not yet. But in that moment, I understood something important. They thought they had finally pulled ahead, that Madison's engagement was the crown jewel of the family. But I carried knowledge that could turn it all upside down. And just knowing that gave me a kind of power I had never felt before. I couldn't shake the memory of that night Rachel first mentioned Ethan to me. It was at a hospital fundraiser, months before Madison even crossed paths with him. Rachel had come home unsettled, describing how a young lawyer had cornered her during the... He had introduced himself with too much confidence, his words slick, his smile practiced. When she brushed him off, thinking he'd take the hint, he leaned closer, ignoring her discomfort, insisting she give him her number. She had to walk away to end it. That man was Ethan Miller. Back then, I pushed the incident aside. Rachel didn't want to make a big deal out of it, and I figured we'd never see him again. But now, hearing his name connected to Madison, knowing he had been welcomed into my family with open arms, the memory burned hot. I kept imagining my sister's face, glowing with pride over her engagement, never suspecting who she was standing beside. The question gnawed at me. Should I tell her? My gut said yes, But another voice reminded me of the pattern I knew too well. Madison had been raised to see me as second best, as jealous whenever things went her way. If I tried to warn her now, she'd laugh it off or worse, accuse me of trying to ruin her happiness. Our parents had trained her to see me through their lens, and in that lens, I was always bitter, always reaching. I pictured the scene, me sitting her down, explaining what Ethan had done, and her brushing me aside with that look she often gave, half pity, half annoyance. My words would hold no weight. In her eyes, Ethan was a prize, and I was the one who couldn't stand to see her win. That thought alone was enough to keep me silent. I knew the truth, and Rachel knew the truth, but speaking it now would only backfire. Instead, I tucked it away like a sharp blade, waiting for the right moment to use it. I didn't have to rush. If Ethan really was the man Rachel had described, the truth would show itself eventually. And when it did, I'd be ready. Rachel sensed the storm building in me. One evening, she asked gently if I was going to say anything to Madison. I shook my head. She wouldn't believe me, I said flatly. Rachel didn't argue, but I could see the unease in her eyes. She didn't trust Ethan either, not after what he'd done. As I sat there, the weight of it pressing down on me, I realized something else. This wasn't just about protecting Madison anymore. It was about showing my parents, once and for all, that the golden future they were parading around was built on sand. They had chosen him as their victory. I knew better, and I wasn't about to let that knowledge go to waste. Once I decided not to warn Madison outright, I knew I needed a different approach. Ethan carried himself with the kind of confidence that comes from believing no one will question you. That same arrogance made me certain he had more to hide. I began paying closer attention, keeping tabs from a distance. Whenever his name came up in conversation with relatives, I listened carefully. The stories about late nights at the office, sudden business trips, and unexplained absences stacked up in my head. The more I heard, the more convinced I became that his perfect image was nothing but a mask. Still, suspicion wasn't enough. I needed proof. Quietly, I reached out to a private investigator. I didn't tell Rachel at first. I wanted to shield her from the uglier details until I had something concrete. Handing over Ethan's information, I felt like I was setting something in motion that couldn't be undone. Weeks passed, and each update from the investigator painted a darker picture. Ethan wasn't just careless, he was reckless. Photos showed him slipping into restaurants with women who weren't Madison, his hand resting too comfortably on their backs. Receipts revealed hotel rooms booked under fake names, always in different cities. The most disturbing part came later. Some of the women were shockingly young, barely out of school, drawn in by his charm and money. Seeing those files laid out in front of me was both sickening and strangely satisfying. There it was, undeniable evidence of the man my parents had elevated, the man they believed would bring honor to our family. I felt anger on Madison's behalf, but also a grim sense of justice. They had chosen to ignore me, to erase me, and now they were blindly celebrating a fraud. I didn't act right away. That would have been too easy. Instead, I tucked the information away and watched as the engagement snowballed into a spectacle. My parents sent out announcements. Madison posed for glossy photos with Ethan, and the community buzzed about the grand wedding being planned. They were blind to the storm looming over them, and I let them continue in their fantasy. At night, Rachel would ask how I felt seeing all of it unfold. I would answer with a calmness that surprised even me. "I'm waiting," I'd say, because that was the truth. I wasn't rushing to expose him. I wanted the moment to sting. I wanted the collapse to come when they were at their highest point, when they believed everything was perfect. Only then would the fall be sharp enough. So I stayed quiet, collecting every detail, keeping the evidence secure. On the surface, I lived my life as usual, going to work, planning small things with Rachel, acting indifferent when relatives mentioned the upcoming wedding. But inside, I was steady, patient, certain. The stage was being set, and when the curtain finally rose, the show would leave scars that couldn't be ignored. The day Madison had been dreaming about finally arrived, and the city buzzed with excitement. My parents had spared no expense. Everything about the ceremony screamed grandeur. Limousines lined the entrance, a string quartet played near the garden, and guests whispered about how this was the event of the year. Everyone important was there, everyone except the brother they had written off. I showed up anyway, not on the guest list, not expected, but present all the same. I slipped into the back rows, dressed simply enough not to draw attention. No one noticed me as their eyes stayed fixed on the decorations, the flowers, the sparkling chandelier. My parents moved from group to group with smiles stretched wide, basking in the glow of what they thought was their proudest moment. As the ceremony began, Madison walked down the aisle beaming, unaware of the storm waiting just behind her groom's polished smile. I watched Ethan stand tall at the altar, his confidence radiating as if the world belonged to him. My chest tightened, not from nerves but from certainty. I knew exactly what was about to unfold. Just before the vows, I made my move. Quietly, I approached an assistant near the stage and handed over a small flash drive. "This goes into the projector," I whispered. She looked puzzled but nodded, slipping it into her pocket. I returned to my seat, heart steady, pulse calm. The trap was set. The officiant lifted the paper with Ethan's vows and began to read. His voice carried through the hall, speaking of loyalty, of devotion, of promises that rang hollow to anyone who knew the truth. Then, at the cue meant for photo slides, the officiant faltered. The screen behind the couple flickered. Instead of smiling pictures of their engagement, grainy images filled the air. Gasps echoed across the room as photographs of Ethan with other women flashed one after another. Hotel receipts, timestamps, clear video clips. It was all there, undeniable. The audience erupted in murmurs, then shouts. Madison's face drained of color, her bouquet slipping from her hands as she turned to her fiancé in disbelief. Ethan stammered, reaching out, but she stepped back, tears streaking her makeup. The hall dissolved into chaos. Guests whispered harshly, some stormed out, others simply stared. My parents stood frozen, mouths open, their perfect facade shattered in front of friends and neighbors. The humiliation was painted across their faces, the proud expressions replaced with horror. I didn't rush to the front or make a scene. I stayed in my seat, watching the unraveling. This was their show, their chosen son-in-law, their grand moment. And it had collapsed in the most public way possible. For Madison, it was heartbreak. For my parents, it was disgrace. For me, it was the silent confirmation that everything they had dismissed, everything they had ignored, had led them here. When I finally rose to leave, no one stopped me. All eyes were locked on the wreckage at the altar, where the dream they had built had crumbled to pieces. The celebration ended in ruins. Guests scattered in every direction, whispers trailing behind them like smoke. Ethan ripped off his jacket, shouted something no one could hear, and stormed out of the hall. Madison collapsed into a chair, sobbing into her hands while bridesmaids tried to comfort her. The band stopped playing, the lights seemed too bright, and the entire evening that was supposed to be their triumph dissolved into shame. I didn't rush to speak, but my parents spotted me as the dust settled. Their expressions were twisted with panic, as if I was suddenly the only person who could salvage the wreck. My father came toward me first, grabbing my arm, his voice low and urgent. "Kwame, do something. Talk to her. Help us fix this." My mother stood behind him, eyes pleading, her earlier pride replaced by desperation. I looked at them, steady and calm. For years, I had longed for their recognition, had bet myself trying to earn even a fraction of the support they poured into Madison. And here they were begging. Not for me, not for Rachel, but for the dream they had pinned on Madison's wedding. I pulled my arm free and answered in a voice that carried across the room. "You skipped my wedding for hers. This is the wedding you wanted. Congratulations." My words hung in the air like a final verdict. Their faces fell, but I didn't wait for a reply. I turned to Rachel, who had been watching from the side, and we walked out together, hand in hand, leaving the wreckage behind. Life after that day moved on, though in very different directions for each of us. Madison tried to pick up the pieces, but whispers followed her everywhere. Ethan's scandals spread quickly, and her name was dragged along with it. She tried to rebuild, but the sparkle she once carried was dimmed. The pedestal my parents had built for her cracked, and they could no longer shield her from the reality of her choices. As for me, I focused on building something steady and real with Rachel. We bought a home, filled it with laughter, and eventually with children who grew up knowing unconditional love. Our lives weren't flashy, but they were solid. Every holiday, every milestone, every ordinary day became a reminder that family isn't defined by who claps the loudest. It's defined by who stands beside you when no one else does. Over time, my parents reached out. Calls, letters, even surprise visits. They wanted forgiveness, a chance to step back into my life. I allowed some contact, but I never opened the door fully again. Their choices had left scars too deep to ignore. Respect couldn't be rebuilt on apologies alone. When I look back now, I don't see the story as one of revenge, though the reveal had been sharp and public. What I gained was more valuable. I stopped chasing approval that was never mine to begin with. I didn't just watch their illusion collapse. I reclaimed my dignity, and with it, the freedom to live on my own terms. Do you think I was right to walk away from my parents after everything, or should I have given them another chance? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.